Can I have the Prime Minister, Alistair, your 5 minutes? First and last minute of protected time? First and last minute of protected time is when you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker. So we outside government obviously think that Ms. Paci would be a far better authoritarian dictator than Ms. Iacobucci. The outside government are Team Paci. So for the definition, if you only think there's one thing really needs to be defined, and that's better. What our definition of better is we're saying that Ms. Paci fulfills qualities of authoritarian dictators like Stalin, Hitler, and Mao, and other dictators like that, much more than Ms. Iacobucci does. And I'm going to have two arguments for this. Mohammed's going to have one. I'm going to be talking about no remorse and being used to power. So basically, my first point is going to be about no remorse. And our first significant example of this, all of you guys were victims of, and that's the pop quiz. And what we really see is what kind of person gives a pop quiz to a class right after they finished an exam. We said that the only kind of person who would do that would be somebody who doesn't have any remorse. We see that this is a huge parallel to Stalin with his purges. She was purging the class, she was finding out who knew what they were talking about, who wasn't. We said that that's fundamentally bad. It fundamentally shows that she had no remorse. She didn't give us the opportunity to prepare. What we would say is that furthermore, it shows what we would say is that it shows a lack of remorse that Ms. Iacobucci has to a certain degree, right? What we would say is that when you have the whole Cho-Iacobucci war going on, Ms. Iacobucci's let Mr. Cho live right now. She doesn't have any enemies right now. She can't name a single person who is Ms. Paci's enemy. She's already gotten rid of them. Hasn't had to throw around. This Iacobucci is showing remorse to Cho. That's not a quality that Stalin, Mao, Hitler, and other authoritarian dictators have. So we think that along this line, the fact that Ms. Paci shows no remorse, in fact, she was laughing at the fact that there was a pop quiz the day later, that clearly shows that she has no remorse. And that's exactly the kind of thing that an authoritarian dictator has, exactly the kind of characteristics that Hitler, Stalin, Mao all share. Would say that furthermore, when she was hinting to our class that the pop quiz may have been Ms. Iacobucci's idea, that showed even more political maneuvering with the sense of others without any remorse at all, shifting the blame to Ms. Iacobucci. That's something that's fundamentally something that was very good on her part, and it means that she's going to be a very effective authoritarian dictator someday. Sure.
Also, I think one thing you fail to realize is that the so-called conflict between Ms. Iacobucci and Ms. Cho isn't really a conflict. Ms. Cho consistently dominates Mr. Cho. What dictators tend to do is they tend to show that they have some kind of opposition, like Stalin did, but in reality they don't have it.
No, that's not true. What did Stalin do to Trotsky? He sent him away and then buried a pickaxe in his brain. You see, right now, she hasn't done that yet. She hasn't shown the kind of ruthlessness that Stalin has, that Hitler has, that Mao has. We see that while that might be good on her ethics side, it's not very good for an authoritarian dictator. So we'd say for that reason, Ms. Paci's going to be far better at that. She's shown that she has no remorse. So, moving on to being used to power. So what I'm going to say right now is that Ms. Paci is right now the IB coordinator. So what exactly does that mean? That means that right now she's used to hearing the screams of tortured children. That she's used to hearing it, and she'll always either ignore it or find a scapegoat for it, as Mohammed's going to go on in this point. But she's used to hearing the screams of dying children, and she's become desensitized to it. She no longer cares about the screams. That she no longer has to deal with that. That's fundamentally good, because dictators have to be ruthless to maintain their power, right? It's she's become used to the kind of absolute power that comes with the position of IB coordinator, right? This is the kind of power that Ms. Iacobucci doesn't really have to the same degree. Sure, she was involved in the EE, but Mr. Leborg was still the head of that. So I would say that Ms. Paci's become far more desensitized because she's become so used to the screams of all of us dying children. Sure.
Are you not aware of the continuous suffering and screaming in Ms. Iacobucci's Portable 1?
To be honest, when I walked in your portable, you guys seemed pretty cheerful. I don't know what you're talking about. But even so, we say that Ms. Paci causes the widespread screaming and panic on a larger scale. She has a lot more experience with that at the time. So now, what we would say is that furthermore, she's become much more unpredictable. She can become much more unpredictable with the use of power, like we saw with the pop quiz. But also telling us, oh, the website's down for IB TOK submissions, which is something that Mohammed's going to get into as well. So basically, what we say is that furthermore, what we say is that dictators have no superiors, right? A description of Mohammed that I got is when asking Ms. Iacobucci what goes in an OPDL, she said, "I'll ask Ms. Paci." Well, what that clearly shows is the fact that Ms. Paci is currently superior. Ms. Paci currently has no person to take advice from, has no counselors, has no superiors. It shows that she has currently the characteristics of an authoritarian dictator, of Stalin, Hitler, Mao, which is much more important. What we'd say, that overall, Ms. Paci is a much more skilled political maneuverer. She's shown that she has no remorse. She's shown that she's become desensitized to the screams of dying children. So that we're very proud to propose. Thank you.
First comment, and I'll call on the member opposite portrait.
David, you bring her jacket. No,
Attention class, CHI4UP. What the Pacians on Team Paci don't realize is that we have a natural-born neo-Soviet leader with natural Soviet blood inherited from her Ukrainian ethnicity. Now, if we examine past historical dictators, successful dictators, we arrive at characters such as Hitler and Stalin. Now, exactly what characteristics did they have that qualified them as good dictators? And class, that is the manipulation into power and the ruthlessness. And I'm going to show you exactly why Ms. Iacobucci has a greater capacity to manipulate others, and she is clearly more ruthless than the pacified Ms. Paci. And I'm also going to be refuting everything that this mistaken man has said. Let's go into my first point, the manipulation of others. Now, if we look at past dictators, Hitler and Stalin, did they immediately inherit their power? And I would say that no, they did not. Hitler started off as a mere painter. Stalin was a man that was elected into a nominal position. They worked their way into power. They manipulated their way power through whatever means they could. They hid in the shadows and pulled strings from behind the curtain to control events to work in their favor. How does Ms. Iacobucci do this? Let's go to debate club in room A214, everybody. When Ms. Iacobucci is not the head, while Ms. Iacobucci is not the head of the debate club is Mr. Guthrie, she is secretly scheming on the laptop she brings every single practice. She is clearly manipulating her way, working her way from positions of relatively little power into great power. And we see this in the Western debate tournament as she moved from simply a mere coach to the head teacher supervisor of a, I would say, provincial level debate tournament. And we would see that her refusal, yes, Mohammed.
Did Ms. Paci teleport into her position of IB coordinator, or don't you think there's many assumptions about something you don't know for fact?
The reason why Ms. Iacobucci did not get her position as IB coordinator was simply because of her existence at White Oak. As Alistair mentioned in her preparation time, his justification was that she simply hasn't been here long enough, that's whatever, that's semantics. And I would like to and that despite the fact that she's not the head IB coordinator, she is the prime enforcer and the prime tyrannizer of the IB population. She's clearly working her way to surpass Ms. Iacobucci. Please sit down. Of Ms. Iacobucci and why she is a purely ruthless character. Let's look at Mr. Patterson hiding in the back. He's in the back right now. He's standing up not because he's respecting Ms. Iacobucci, it's because he's standing in fear. She hacked his computer, Mr. Class. The ruining of public image. Let's see the Stalin-Trotsky example. How Stalin continuously bashed the image of Trotsky. I'll take it in a second. That's exactly happening with Ms. Iacobucci and Mr. Cho. After every continuous victory she has, she proclaims that to the public to boost her image and to destroy Mr. Cho's image. Why do you disagree?
But if Ms. Iacobucci is the military enforcer, doesn't that make her a lot more similar to Trotsky as opposed to Stalin, who's obviously Ms. Paci for all her political power?
No, you clearly did not listen to my point. Manipulation into power. She is brilliant, just like Stalin, in his planning. His ability to manipulate his way into power, his ability to transform the opinions of others to guarantee her future spot as head IB coordinator. And I'd like to point out another ruthless development that we constantly find within Ms. Iacobucci. her relentless dominating of Mr. Cho in every sport they play. And Alistair comes up here and talks about no remorse. And I talked to you about this screaming in Ms. Iacobucci's class. Now, as with all dictators, we simply lie to the public to make ourselves obviously wouldn't show you the screaming. And comes from use to power, saying that Ms. Iacobucci, or she's used to power, and I refuted that Ms. Your name's Ms. Iacobucci. He also uses power. And he says no remorse, victims of pop quiz. Ms. Iacobucci constantly hands out late essays without remorse. She meticulously observes our population to find our mistakes and finding every possible way to punish us. So we would see that Ms. Iacobucci, in fact, shows lesser remorse than the pacified Miss Paci, and in fact, that she is more used to her power as a prime tyrannizer of the IB population. And for that reason,
Thank you for those comments. Now I'll call upon the member of the government for his, Mr. Crown. Whenever you are ready.
When the 5-year plans predictably failed to produce the unrealistic results that were set by Stalin, what did he do? He went and blamed the industrial saboteurs. He blamed it on managerial sabotage. He blamed it on the imperialists, the capitalists, the Mensheviks. Now, what happened a few weeks ago when I asked Ms. Paci about why my TOK essay, why I can't submit it? She blamed the password. She blamed the ID. She blamed the submission website. And then she blamed Google Chrome and my Ms. Paci always attempts to maintain her flawless image and her flawless reputation. When we all asked her, Ms. Paci, were you behind this paper 1 test, this pop test? She giggled and said no comment, obviously insinuating that it was Ms. Iacobucci's fault. She's always trying to maintain her reputation and her image. What does Ms. I do, on the other hand? And this is something that David was sure to talk about. She goes up and flaunts her victories. She tells us about how she beats Mr. Cho and Mr. Patterson all day, every day. So she has no interest in keeping this pristine image, unlike Ms. Paci, just like Stalin, Mussolini, and Hitler. A dictator is never perceived as somebody who is ruthless and evil. These are two things that Miss I is commonly known for. So she obviously deviates from the definition of what a dictator represents. Mussolini and Hitler were actually perceived as benevolent liberators. They were kind and gentle, provided for the people. This is the same facade that Miss Paci upholds so well. In that sense, she's very similar to these dictators, and Miss I represents actually a stark contrast. Yeah.
The partner stands up and says that Ms. Paci strives to look extremely powerful, and she does this by eliminating all her enemies, hence why she has no enemies. And then you stand up and say that dictators don't always want to seem powerful, only just contradiction.
Well, you see, it's subtle. We don't see her actually quarreling with any of her dictators, so she seems kind, and that her enemies deserve to die. They deserve to be. Whereas on the other hand, we see Mr. Cho and we see Mr. Patterson, these sort of docile, nice guys, who are being beaten on a daily basis by Mr. His point still stands. So let me go into some reputations. David stood up, and the first thing he said, and I'm glad he backed away from this because it was a terrible point. He said, well, Ms. Iacobucci is in her blood. It's in her Soviet blood. Well, let's take this reasoning a step further. If you look at Garry Kasparov, arguably the greatest chess grandmaster, he was more directly Russian, but he was perceived as a very kind guy, not a dictator at all. Artem, for example, also is a very nice guy, also Russian, no dictatorial traits there, his point falls. So what was his first actual point? He talked about how Ms. Iacobucci is manipulative, how she pulls strings to get into power. Mussolini, Stalin, Hitler, and my father all have mustaches. They may all also be dictators, but there is no causal relationship between having a mustache and being a dictator. David every day goes on his playbook and manipulates his Pokemon in his game, but he has no power whatsoever. He doesn't resemble a dictator at all. Miss Paci, on the other hand, even if we're to accept David's reasoning, is in a higher position, one that actually may have necessitated some manipulative skills, some political maneuvering, like Alistair talked about. Whether or not his point is true, we win on both sides. What's his second point? His second point is about ruthlessness. How Ms. Iacobucci simply won't spare Mr. Cho or Mr. Patterson. I've dealt with this enough in my constructive, but let's assume that it's a valid point. What do we say to it then? Just 1 hour ago in our chemistry class, Ms. Iacobucci walked in and she gave us a letter. What was the title of that letter? It said, "Get well soon, Mr. Cho." To me, that doesn't at all indicate ruthlessness. Rather, I don't think anybody here has ever seen Miss Paci give well soon. So on that point, we'd say Ms. Iacobucci isn't as ruthless as they'd like to think, and even if she is, we think that's a way that she's damaging her image, protected time. So what did they say to Alistair's points? Nothing at all, really. Alistair stood up and told you that Miss Paci has no remorse. She's always mean and evil and cruel to her children, but she can still maintain this kind and happy facade that I talked about in my constructive point. This is very much like Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler. They can be very manipulative. They do very terrible things to their students, like with the Paper 1 test, but go on to deny it to maintain their pristine image of kindness and their facade of benevolence, just like all the dictators. I think Alistair and I have clearly shown how Miss Paci fits all of the features of a dictator, and Miss I simply has missed out. Sorry.
And now call upon the leader of the opposition for his final five.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are three things that are certain to be death, taxes, and Ms. Iacobucci's ruthlessness. And that's something that side government has just failed to see. In every sense of the word, Ms. Iacobucci is just a much more ruthless individual than Ms. Paci is or ever hoped to be. I'm going to show you by doing three things in my speech why we've won this debate. Firstly, my constructive argument. Secondly, I'm going to refute, do a sweeping refutation of all of side government's arguments. And then finally go on to rebuild David's excellent points. First, I want to talk about interpersonal skills. And what I mean by this is that Ms. Iacobucci has a great interpersonal skills befitting of a dictator. And yes, consequently, I mean that Ms. Paci does not have interpersonal skills. No offense. What I mean by this is Ms. Iacobucci is always available. And now, why is this a good thing? Because the best dictators in history were always available. I pause to you, ladies and gentlemen, the examples of Stalin, who was always available during Lenin's funeral. And that was how he was able to give a speech and persuade the party members that he was the best leader. Miss Paci, on the other hand, is quite hard to find. Can I meet with you on this day to talk about my American applications? Can I meet with you on this day to talk about scholarships? It's really difficult. Not this time. I know where Ms. Iacobucci is at all times. Either she's at the big club, either she's at debate practice, either she's in the history office. She's always available for me to talk to. Yeah.
Since they're both at the school all day, don't you think that this just indicates Ms. Paci's greater popularity, that which is befitting of a dictator?
I don't know how not being available is necessarily an indication of her being more popular, because you're making the assumption that if she's not available to me, then she must be with someone else. But that's not necessarily the case. I don't know if that's necessarily true. The fact of the matter is, she's not with me. She's available. I want to talk about forming a power base, because all the dictators know how to form a good power base. I posed you the example of Stalin and the Lenin enrollment in 1924. When Lenin died, the Bolshevik Party wanted 250,000 new members to join their party. Who was put in charge of this? Stalin. What did he do? He got 250,000 of his diehard henchmen to fill those positions. Look what happened in this debate. Who chose the four people to debate here? It wasn't Ms. Paci, it was Ms. Iacobucci, thus showing that she has control over what she wants to do, and she puts her henchmen in the places where she wants to put them. So for that reason, we think that stands. Let's go into reputation. They talk about how Ms. Paci has no remorse. They give you the examples of the pop test after the break, and how Paci has no enemies. And the reason why she has no enemies is because she's exterminated all of them. We stood up on a POI and posited to you that dictators want to show that they're powerful, so it's not actually good for a dictator to have no enemies. Stalin showed that his enemies were Trotsky and Bukharin and all those other guys, even though he could have beat them one-on-one whenever he wanted to. He does those things because he wants to show that he's powerful and he's continuously beating people, and that's what Ms. Iacobucci does with Mr. Cho and Mr. Patterson. She continuously beats people. That's something that we haven't seen with Ms. Paci. Also, Alistair says that when he walked into a portable, it was completely peaceful. David already touched upon this. Once again, dictators don't want to show to outsiders that what they're operating is a very ruthless place. A lot of the Western European nations thought that Russia and the Soviet Union was all fine and dandy, but at the end of the day, it was just Stalin propaganda, and that's what he's been a victim of, Ms. Iacobucci's propaganda. He thinks that it's peaceful when it isn't. So the fact that someone who is posing for Ms. Paci's dominance actually fell under one of Ms. Iacobucci's tactics, I'll leave you to decide that yourself. But another thing they talk about is maintenance of a flawless image. And I stood up at a POI and mentioned the contradiction. Alistair says the best quality of Ms. Paci is that she is like almost immune, that she's almost powerful, like godlike. She doesn't have any enemies. And then Mohammed stands up and says that the best quality of Paci is that her ability to seem innocent. So we're not really sure what the best quality of Ms. Paci is, or if she has any positive qualities of a dictator at all. I mean, it's sort of the contradiction. I asked them to, but they didn't, so not this time. Let's go to the David talks about ruthlessness, and we think this point still stands. The only thing that they said in response to this is that Iacobucci gives get-well-soon cards, and we don't think that this is an indication that Ms. Iacobucci, excuse me, not Stalin, these dictators sometimes can show emotion. For example, at the end of Stalin's regime, when he found out that his daughter had slept with a Jewish man, he conducted a mass purge of all Jews. That's acting on your emotions. Dictators sometimes do that. She evidently is an emotional person, and he has no symptoms. This is what stands. Then David talks about manipulation, and how Ms. Iacobucci and Stalin are both very good at manipulating individuals. Now, the only thing that Mohammed really says to this is that you need a mustache to be a ruthless dictator. He gives examples of his dad, Hitler and Stalin. Neither of these people have mustaches. So I don't really know where he's going with that argument, so I'm not going to bother to refute that. But if you remember one thing from the side's opposition today, let it be that Ms. Iacobucci, in every sense of the word, she's more manipulative, she's more ruthless, her interpersonal skills are better, she's just a better dictator overall. Thank you.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed today. There's no homework for tonight. The only thing you guys have coming up is going to be not next Monday, but the following Monday is your test. Other than that, I think we should take a vote. No. It's a lose-lose situation. It is a lose-lose situation.
I think we should have a third party count the votes, because otherwise you might like.
Both of you are ruthless, so.
But in December, I had one fewer kid in my class because I killed one of them. Remember that hater kid that came for the first time?
Terminated.
Take a moment.
So the deciding vote with 3 abstentions, 1 sad face. Hurry up. We've got 1 sad face, 1 for Tim Tebow's arms. 1 for Iacobucci /Paci.